The city outside was a distant ocean of sound. Lying in her bed, Ilara could hear it, the low, constant rumble of traffic like a never-ending waterfall miles away. Sometimes a siren would cut through the night, a sharp, lonely cry that faded as quickly as it came. But inside her apartment, it was quiet. Too quiet. This was the silence that kept her awake. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, empty silence that seemed to press down on her chest. And in that silence, the only thing she could hear was the sound inside her own head, a high-pitched, steady hiss. The doctor had called it tinnitus. He said her ears were fine, that it was probably just stress. But to Ilara, it was a prison guard, standing watch over her insomnia, making sure she never truly found rest. She turned over, the sheets twisting around her legs. The digital clock on her bedside table glowed a relentless red. 3:17 a.m. Another night. Another battle. She had tried everything. Warm milk, which she hated. Counting sheep, which just made her think of confused jumping farm animals. White noise machines that played the sound of rain or ocean waves. But they always felt fake. Like a cheap recording of nature that did nothing to calm the storm in her mind. With a sigh that came from the very bottom of her tired soul, she sat up. There was no point in fighting it anymore. She swung her feet out onto the cool wooden floor and padded softly into the main room of her apartment. It served as her living room, her kitchen, and her studio. This was her world. The room was dominated by a large desk holding 2 large computer screens, a professional audio mixer, and a heavy, expensive pair of headphones. On the walls, acoustic foam panels in a dark gray color soaked up any stray sound, making the room even quieter than the bedroom. This was where she worked, where she lost herself. Ilara was a sound engineer. She took the messy, raw sounds of the world and polished them, fixed them, and made them perfect for films and advertisements. She could make a crumpled piece of paper sound like a thunderclap or a whisper sound like it was spoken right next to your ear. It was ironic, she thought. She could create any sound in the world, but she couldn't find one to help her sleep. She sat down in her worn, comfortable chair, the wheels squeaking softly. The screens flickered to life with a tap of the mouse. She didn't know what she was looking for. Maybe just something to distract her until the sun came up. Her browser was still open from the day before, filled with tabs for work. But one tab stood out. It was from NASA's public data portal. A few days ago, out of sheer curiosity, she had been looking for something different. Something untouched by human noise. She had found the raw data streams from a probe called Messenger, which had spent years orbiting the planet Mercury. It was just numbers and symbols, telemetry about magnetic fields, solar particle counts, and surface temperature changes. Most people would see a confusing spreadsheet. But Ilara saw something else. She saw a potential symphony. On a whim, late last night before giving up on sleep, she had downloaded a small packet of this data. It was just a few hours worth of readings from the planet's surface and orbit. Now in the deep blue light of the monitor at 3 a.m, she opened the file. Columns and columns of numbers filled the screen. It looked cold and impersonal, but her mind, trained to think in frequencies and waveforms, started to imagine. What would a solar wind particle hitting the planet's surface sound like? Not in reality, because space has no sound, but in theory. What would the slow, grinding expansion and contraction of the planet's crust as it heated and cooled feel like as a vibration? A crazy idea started to form in her sleep-deprived brain. What if her problem wasn't the silence, but the kind of sound she was using? Rain and ocean waves were from Earth. They were familiar. Her brain knew them, and in its stubborn wakefulness, it ignored them. But this was alien. This was from a world next to the sun. It had no air, no water, no life. Its sounds, if it could have sounds, would be entirely new. They wouldn't have any memories attached to them. No stress, no worries. Just pure, raw, planetary data. Her fingers began to fly across the keyboard. She opened her audio software, a complex program she knew as well as her own face. She started writing a simple code, a set of instructions. It was a translator. It would take these cold numbers from Mercury and turn them into sound. She decided that low numbers would be low, deep tones. High numbers would be higher pitches. The speed of the data changes would control the rhythm. It was a rough guess, an experiment. She connected the data to a synthesizer, a digital instrument that could create any sound imaginable. She took a deep breath, her finger hovering over the mouse. For a moment, she just listened to the hiss in her ears, the familiar enemy. Then she clicked play. What came out of her high-quality studio speakers was not music. It was chaos. A harsh, screeching static blared mixed with random booming thuds that made her jump. It was awful. It was the sound of a machine breaking of digital nails on a chalkboard. It was more stressful than the silence. A wave of disappointment washed over her. She slumped back in her chair. Of course, it was a stupid idea. What did she expect? A planet couldn't sing her a lullaby. She was about to close the program to go back to staring at the wall, when she noticed something. Beneath the harsh screeches and the random booms, there was something else. A very low, almost impossibly deep hum. It was so low she felt it more than heard it. A vibration in her chest. It was steady, like a giant sleeping heartbeat. She quickly adjusted her code, filtering out the highest, most painful frequencies. She turned down the volume on the chaotic middle-range sounds and boosted the bass. She listened again. The screeching was gone. Now the sound was dominated by that deep, resonant hum, and layered over the top of it was a new sound. A delicate, shimmering texture like tiny grains of glass being gently stirred. It was strange. It was completely alien, but it wasn't unpleasant. She didn't know it yet, but she had just heard the first two voices of Mercury. The deep hum was the slow, ancient pulse of the planet itself. The shimmering glass sound was the surface superheated by the sun, cracking and shifting in the incredible heat. Ilara didn't find sleep that night. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't fighting the silence. She was listening to something new. She leaned forward, her tired eyes now wide with focus, and began to work. The red numbers of the clock forgotten. The hiss in her ears was still there, but for now it had some competition. The sun was already up by the time Ilara finally pushed herself away from her desk. Her back ached, and her eyes felt gritty and dry. The red numbers on her stove clock now read 7:48 a.m. She had missed the entire night, but for the first time in months, it wasn't because she was tossing and turning in bed. It was because she had been completely, utterly lost in her work. She stood up, her joints popping, and walked to the small kitchen area to make coffee. As the machine gurgled and hissed, a real comforting sound, her mind was still back at her desk, swimming with numbers and frequencies. The chaotic noise from a few hours ago was gone. In its place was a foundation, something she could build on. She had discovered the deep voice of the planet and the delicate, glassy sound of its surface. But she knew it was only the beginning. Mercury had more to say. She just had to learn how to listen. The idea that had started as a sleepy 3 a.m. crazy thought was now taking root in her mind. It wasn't just an experiment anymore. It felt like a mission. She wasn't just creating random sounds. She was becoming a translator for a world 48 million miles away. Later that day, after a few hours of fitful sleep, she returned to her desk with a new energy. She went back to the NASA data portal, but this time she dug deeper. She wasn't just looking at one data set anymore. She searched for everything she could find. She discovered readings on Mercury's magnetosphere, the invisible magnetic bubble that surrounded the planet, protecting it from the supersonic wind of particles blasting from the sun. She found data on micrometeorite impacts, the constant, tiny rain of space dust hitting the barren surface. She even found information about the massive temperature swings, from scorching 430 degrees Celsius on the sunlit side to a freezing 180 degrees Celsius in the shadows. Each of these scientific facts presented a new sonic puzzle for her. She would read a description and then close her eyes, trying to imagine the sound. The solar wind, she muttered to herself, scrolling through the data. It's a stream of energy, a constant flow. She imagined it not as a harsh screech, but as a sustained, breathy rush, like a never-ending exhalation. She assigned the data to a soft, airy synthesizer sound and blended it gently with the deep planetary hum. It worked. It added a layer of movement, a sense of the vast, empty space around the world. Next, she looked at the micrometeorite data. Each tiny impact was a single event, a moment in time. She didn't want a loud, explosive sound. That would be jarring. Instead, she thought of them like gentle, random raindrops. She programmed her translator to create a soft, percussive ping for each tiny impact, a sound like a small metal droplet falling into a pool of water. She scattered these pings randomly, very quietly across the soundscape. They became little moments of detail, like stars twinkling in an audio sky. The hardest part was the temperature. How do you make a temperature change sound? She stared at the data graph. a line that went up and down dramatically. She decided to link it to a very slow, shifting chord. As the temperature data rose towards its peak, the chord would gradually become brighter, slightly more intense. As it fell into the deep freeze of the night, the chord would become darker, more somber. It was a subtle change, almost felt more than heard, but it gave the soundscape a sense of time, of a slow planetary heartbeat. She was no longer just a sound engineer. She felt like a composer, and Mercury was her orchestra. Each data set was a different section. The string section of the solar wind, the percussion of the micrometeorites, the brass section of the core's deep hum. Hours melted away again. She forgot to eat. She forgot to feel tired. Her world had shrunk to the glow of her screens and the sounds coming from her speakers. She would make a small adjustment, listen, tilt her head, and then make another. It was a process of feeling, of intuition. She was trying to find a balance, a harmony that felt right, that felt real. Finally, after what felt like both a minute and a lifetime, she leaned back. She had woven all the layers together, the hum, the glass, the solar wind, the meteorite pings, and the temperature chord. She saved the file and named it, Mercury Soundscape Draft 1. Took a deep breath and pressed play. What she heard made the hairs on her arms stand up. It wasn't a song. It wasn't music in any traditional sense. It was an environment. It was a place. The deep hum was the ground beneath her feet. The shimmering glass sound was the air around her. The rush of the solar wind was a constant, gentle breeze. The occasional soft ping was a reminder of the lonely, ongoing construction of the planet. And underneath it all, the slow, shifting chord gave the entire thing a feeling of immense, ancient time. It was strange. It was beautiful. It was completely and totally alien. And then something happened that she didn't expect. A feeling of immense calm washed over her. The constant, anxious buzz in her mind. The one that was always there, even louder than the tinnitus, just quieted down. It was as if her busy brain had finally found something so new, so complex and yet so peaceful, that it had to stop its own chatter to listen. She didn't fight it. She lowered the volume until it was just a whisper in the room. Then she moved away from her desk and lay down on the small sofa she almost never used. She closed her eyes, not to try and sleep, but just to listen. She pictured herself standing on the surface of Mercury. The sun was a huge, terrifyingly large fireball in the black sky, but here, in the sound, it wasn't scary. It was just a source of energy, of light, of the gentle warmth in the shifting chords. She was a tiny speck on a vast, silent world, and for the first time, that thought didn't make her feel lonely. It made her feel peaceful. She didn't know how long she lay there, drifting in the sounds of another world. But when she opened her eyes again, the room was dark. She had fallen asleep. Not a desperate, exhausted collapse, but a gentle, natural drift into rest. She sat up, feeling disoriented but clear-headed. She looked at the speakers from which the quiet, ethereal sounds of Mercury still flowed. She had set out to create a sound to fight her silence. She hadn't realized she was also creating a place for her mind to rest. The feeling was so unfamiliar that it took Alara a moment to recognize it. She woke up on her sofa, wrapped in a soft blanket she didn't remember getting, and for the first few seconds her mind was quiet. The usual storm of thoughts, the worries about work, the mental to-do lists, the replaying of old conversations, was absent. There was just a gentle, warm stillness. Then she heard it, the soft, deep hum and the shimmering whisper of her Mercury soundscape, still playing from the speakers. She had slept, not the broken, shallow sleep she was used to, but a deep, solid chunk of rest. She felt rested. A genuine physical feeling of renewal that was so rare it almost felt like a memory. A slow smile spread across her face. It had worked. Her crazy all-night experiment had actually worked. This success lit a new fire under her. The project was no longer just a curiosity. It was a lifeline. She started spending every free moment at her desk. Her proper work, the commercial sound editing for advertisements, began to feel like a boring chore she had to finish before she could return to her real passion, her conversations with Mercury. She started thinking of the sounds not just as data, but as landscapes. The deep, steady hum was the foundation of everything. She named it the core pulse. It was the heartbeat of the planet, the low resonant drum that everything else was built upon. The delicate, glassy sound, the one that shimmered and sparkled over the top, became the sun-touched ridges. She imagined it as the sound of the planet's surface, expanding and contracting under the incredible heat of the nearby sun, creating a music of cracking rock and shifting dust. But she knew a planet was more than just a core and a surface. She went back to the data, hungry for more. She found detailed maps of Mercury's terrain, and one feature captured her imagination: the Rachmaninoff Basin. It was a vast, deep impact crater named after the composer. To Alara, that felt like a sign. The data for the basin showed it was a place of extremes, deeper shadows, steeper cliffs. How could she translate that depth into sound? She spent a whole evening experimenting, feeling frustrated. Making the core pulse louder in that area just made it muddy. Making the sun-touched ridges sharper made it sound harsh. Then she had a breakthrough. Depth wasn't about volume, it was about complexity. She created a new layer just for the canyon. She took the core pulse and added a very slow echoing effect to it, so that in the canyon the planet's heartbeat had a faint repeating whisper that followed it. It sounded like the hum was bouncing off immense ancient cliff walls. She called this new layer the Canyon Echo. It gave a sense of space, of immense, lonely geography. Her soundscape was becoming a world. She could close her eyes and feel like she was flying over it, floating over the bright, shimmering ridges, then diving down into the deep, echoing canyons with the constant solar wind rushing past her ears. One night, about a week after her first successful sleep, she decided to do a real test. She set up a small speaker on her bedside table. She created a new 1-hour-long version of the soundscape, carefully balanced so it was smooth and wouldn't have any sudden, jarring changes. She called this file Mercury Night 1. That night, the ritual felt different. She wasn't just going to bed to fail at sleeping. She was embarking on a journey. She brushed her teeth, washed her face, and got into bed with a sense of purpose. She took a deep breath, said a quiet, almost silly good luck to herself, and pressed play on her phone. The sounds filled the dark room. The core pulse was a soft vibration she could feel in her bones. The sun-touched ridges were a delicate tapestry above it. She listened to the gentle pings of micrometeorites, like faraway wind chimes in the void. Her mind, as usual, tried to fight it at first. An old worry about a work deadline popped into her head. Did I send that final mix to the client? The thought was like a little boat on a turbulent mental ocean. But instead of the ocean being a chaotic storm, it was the deep rhythmic waves of Mercury's sound. The worry boat bobbed for a moment and then was gently carried away by the core pulse. Another thought came. What if this stops working? What if I can never sleep without it? This was a bigger, scarier boat. But then, the canyon echo layer swelled slightly, a deep echoing tone that seemed to say, I am ancient. I have been here for billions of years. Your worry is small and temporary. The scary boat didn't sink, but it drifted into the distance, becoming small and unimportant. This was the magic. The soundscape wasn't a wall that blocked her thoughts. It was a landscape so vast and absorbing that her thoughts couldn't dominate it. They would appear, but they would get lost in the canyons or rise up into the solar wind and drift away. She wasn't consciously thinking any of this. She was just experiencing it, feeling her body relax into the mattress, feeling her breathing slow down and sync with the slow, rhythmic shifts of the temperature cord. The hiss in her ears was still there, but now it was just one more layer, blending with the shimmer of the sun-touched ridges until she could barely tell them apart. She didn't remember the moment she fell asleep. There was no struggle. It was a seamless transition from listening to the sounds of a faraway planet to dreaming of floating through silent, star-filled canyons. The next morning, she woke up naturally. The soundscape had ended hours ago and the room was silent. The first thing she felt was the absence of a feeling. The heavy, groggy dread of another sleepless night was gone. It was replaced by a simple, clear feeling of being awake. She lay there for a few minutes, just enjoying the quiet in her head. She looked at the small speaker on her nightstand. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was a spaceship, a telescope, and a key all in one. She had discovered the first canyons on Mercury, and in doing so, she had found a path through the canyons of her own insomnia. For the first time in a very, very long time, Ilara felt a sense of hope that was as solid and real as the ground beneath her feet. The change in Ilara's life was slow and quiet, like a gentle tide coming in. The dark circles under her eyes began to fade. The constant jittery feeling in her hands, a side effect of perpetual exhaustion, settled into a new calm. She started remembering small things like buying milk before it ran out, and she found herself humming while she washed her dishes. These were small victories, but to Alara they felt monumental. Her nights were now a sacred ritual. The Mercury night file was her nightly spaceship. Each evening she would climb into bed, press play, and let the sounds of that distant world carry her away into a deep, restorative sleep. She had even started creating different versions, a shorter one for afternoon naps and a longer, more complex one for the deep night. But with this new piece came a strange, growing feeling. It was a feeling of loneliness. She had created this entire universe of sound, a secret that lived only in her apartment and inside her head. She would be in a grocery store, listening to people chat about the weather or a TV show, and she would think, I have a direct line to the planet Mercury, and it's helping me sleep. The thought was so bizarre, so isolating that she could never say it out loud. It was her secret, and while it was precious, it was also heavy to carry alone. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, while finishing up a tedious sound edit for a car commercial, the feeling became overwhelming. She felt a powerful urge to share it, to just put it out into the world and see if it resonated with anyone else. It wasn't about fame or money, it was about connection. Was she the only person in the world who would find comfort in the sounds of a silent planet? Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. Where could she even share such a thing? Social media felt too loud and public. Then she remembered a website a fellow sound engineer had mentioned once years ago. It was a quiet niche forum called Ambient Horizons. It was a place for people who created and loved ambient music, long, slow, sound-based pieces meant for background and meditation. It was full of people discussing the sounds of forests, oceans, and synthesizers, maybe. Just maybe. They wouldn't think the sounds of Mercury were too strange. With a nervous flutter in her stomach, she navigated to the site. The design was simple, almost old-fashioned. There were no flashy ads, just people with usernames like Drone Dreamer and Echo Vault, having calm, technical discussions about reverb and frequency. It felt like a digital library. She created a new account. For a username, she typed, Quiet Canyons. It felt right. She started a new thread. The title was simple. An experiment. The sounds of Mercury. Her heart beat a little faster as she began to type. She kept it short and honest. Hello, she wrote. I'm a sound engineer and I've been having trouble sleeping. I started a project to sonify data from NASA's messenger probe orbiting Mercury. I turned magnetic field data, solar wind, and temperature shifts into sound. I found it surprisingly calming. I thought maybe someone here might find it interesting. This is a short sample from an area I'm calling the Rachmaninoff Basin. She attached a 3-minute audio file. It was a gentle section featuring the deep core pulse and the soft echoing whispers of her canyon echo layer. She took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to the internet gods, and clicked post. Then she immediately closed her laptop. The nervous flutter had turned into a full-blown swarm of butterflies. What did I just do? She thought. They're going to think I'm a complete weirdo. She felt exposed, as if she had just posted a page from her private diary online. For the rest of the day, she avoided her computer. She cleaned her apartment, which was already clean. She organized her cables. She tried to read a book, but the words just swam in front of her eyes. All she could think about was her post, floating out there in the digital silence, being ignored or worse, laughed at. The next morning, after a night of sleep that was less solid than usual thanks to her anxiety, she finally built up the courage to open her laptop again. Her hands were slightly damp as she navigated back to the Ambient Horizons forum. She had a notification. One new reply, her throat felt tight. She clicked on the thread. The reply was from a user named Kyle. His profile said he was an astronomer. Her heart sank a little. This was it. A real scientist was going to tear her work apart, explaining how her sounds were completely unscientific and ridiculous. She forced herself to read his message. Quiet Canyons, it began. This is fascinating. Thank you for sharing. Alara blinked. She read the sentence again. It wasn't criticism. It was a thank you. The message continued. The sense of depth and space you've created is incredible. I've studied the Rachmaninoff Basin for years, and you've somehow captured its feel in a way that graphs and images never could. There's one particular detail I wanted to ask you about. At around the 147 mark, there's a very subtle, repeating click-like sound, almost like slow Geiger counter. It's very quiet in the mix. Was that an intentional addition? Ilara's mind raced. She knew exactly the sound he was talking about. She had noticed it herself in the data. It was a tiny, rhythmic pattern that appeared in the temperature data for the shadowed parts of the canyon. She had assumed it was some kind of minor error in the data stream, a glitch, but it had a nice rhythm. So she had translated it into a soft, percussive click and left it in, thinking it added a little texture. She had almost removed it, thinking it was a mistake. She quickly typed a reply, her fingers stumbling over the keys. Hello, Kale. Thank you for your kind words. Yes, I know the sound you mean. I found it in the thermal emission data for the permanently shadowed parts of the canyon. I thought it might be an artifact, a glitch in the data, but I liked the rhythm, so I kept it in. Is it wrong? She posted the reply and waited, refreshing the page every few minutes. The response came quicker than she expected. Kale wrote, "A glitch? No, not at all. That's brilliant. What you're hearing, or rather what you're seeing in the data and translating, is the thermal cracking. Those shadowed crater walls are some of the coldest places in the solar system. The rock is constantly undergoing minute stress fractures from the extreme temperature difference with the sunlit areas. That click is the sound of a canyon getting a little deeper, a little older, one tiny crack at a time. You didn't just make up a sound, you found the heartbeat of the geology itself." Ilara sat back in her chair, utterly stunned. She looked at her speakers, then back at the screen. A warm, expansive feeling spread through her chest, pushing out the loneliness she had felt for so long. He understood. Not only did he understand, he had shown her that her intuition was right. The sound she had almost deleted was, in fact, one of the most real and fascinating parts of the entire piece. She wasn't just making art. She was having a conversation with a planet, and for the first time, someone else was listening in. In the dark silence of her studio, she no longer felt alone. The feeling of being understood was like a key turning in a lock inside Ilara's chest. A door she hadn't even known was closed swung open, letting in a fresh breeze. She immediately wrote back to Kale, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. She thanked him for the explanation about the thermal cracking, calling it the most amazing thing anyone has ever told me about something I've created. And just like that, a conversation began. It started there on the public forum, but soon Kale sent her a private message on the site. "It might be easier to talk here," he wrote. "The forum can be a bit slow." Their messages started to fly back and forth. Kale, it turned out, was a research astronomer who specialized in the geology of the inner planets, with a particular love for Mercury. He explained that most of his days were spent staring at graphs, maps, and spectra, dry visual information. Hearing Ilara's soundscape, he said, was like being given a new sense. "I've looked at the Caloris Basin for a decade," he wrote one evening. "But when I listened to your piece, I felt like I was there for the first time. I could feel the scale." For Ilara, talking to Kale was like being given a guidebook to a country she had only been exploring by feel. She would tell him about a sound she was trying to create, like the voice of a large iron meteorite she thought might be buried deep under the surface. Kale would respond not with a simple answer, but with a science lesson that felt like a story. "Think of the planet's core not as a solid ball," he wrote, "but as a dynamic, swirling ocean of molten metal. The flow of that liquid iron generates Mercury's magnetic field. So the voice of the core isn't a single note. It's a complex, shifting chorus of currents. Maybe try using multiple, slightly out-of-sync low frequencies all moving together." Ilara would read his messages 2 or 3 times, her mind racing with new ideas. She would then dive into her software, trying to translate his words into sound. She created a new layer she called the Iron Tide, using a complex set of 5 or 6 very deep tones that slowly waxed and waned, overlapping in a way that felt both powerful and fluid. It made the original core pulse feel richer, more alive. She sent him the new sample. His reply was a single line, "That's it. That's the heartbeat." This became their rhythm. Ilara, the artist, working by intuition and feel. Kale, the scientist, providing the context and the facts. She was mapping the emotional landscape of the planet. He was providing the topographical map. Together they were creating something neither could have alone. One day, Ilara was working on the sounds for Mercury's ghost volcanoes, ancient, long-dead volcanoes that had shaped the planet's past. She was struggling to find a sound that felt both powerful and ancient, now silent but whose presence could still be felt. She sent a message to Cale. "I'm trying to create the sound of a volcano that hasn't erupted in 1 billion years. Any ideas?" Cale's response took a little longer than usual. When it came, it was more personal. "That's a tough one. It reminds me of why I got into this. When I was a kid, I had a telescope. I remember the first time I saw Mercury, just a tiny speck. My dad told me it was a dead world, but I never believed that. A world isn't dead just because it's quiet. It's just listening. Maybe the sound isn't the eruption. Maybe it's the memory of the heat. Look for data on residual radioactivity in the volcanic plains. That's the planet's memory of its fiery youth." Ilara read his words and a lump formed in her throat. A world isn't dead just because it's quiet. It was exactly how she had come to feel about Mercury, and in a way about herself. She wasn't broken just because her mind was sometimes too loud. She was just listening. She found the data on radioactive elements and created a sound she called Ember Memories. It was a very faint, warm, crackling layer, almost like a fireplace heard from several rooms away. It was barely audible, but it gave the entire soundscape a deep, warm history. As the weeks passed, their messages became longer. They started talking about more than just Mercury. He would tell her about the frustrations of his work, the pressure to publish papers. She would share her annoyance with difficult clients who wanted more energetic sounds for their boring products. They discovered a shared love for terrible science fiction movies and good, strong coffee. Ilara found herself smiling at her screen multiple times a day. The first thing she did in the morning after turning off her Mercury soundscape was to check for a message from Cale. Her studio, once a place of isolation, now felt like a place of connection. The silence was no longer filled with just the sounds of a planet, but with the anticipation of a new idea, a new piece of the puzzle, sent to her from a fellow explorer. She was no longer just a sound engineer talking to data. She was a person talking to a friend. The project had given her sleep, but this new friendship, born from a single comment in the dark, was giving her something else she hadn't realized she was missing. A shared sense of wonder. The collaboration with Cale had become the steady rhythm of Ilara's days. Her work for clients was just a job she did to pay the bills, but her real work, her work with Mercury, was a living, breathing thing that grew with every message they exchanged. One morning, Cale sent a message that was different from the others. It was simple, but it felt heavy with importance. "Ilara," it began. He almost always used her forum name, Quiet Canyons, so seeing her real name made her sit up straight. "I think you're ready for the big one. Let's talk about the Caloris Basin." Ilara knew the name. It was one of the largest impact basins in the entire solar system. A colossal scar on the face of Mercury, so big that lava had flooded it long ago, creating a vast, smooth plain surrounded by a ring of mountains. She had been avoiding it. It felt too big, too epic for her to capture. How could she possibly create a sound for an event that was both an act of violent destruction and the beginning of a new geological chapter? "I'm not sure I can do it justice," she typed back, her doubt clear in the words. Cale's reply was instant. "You can, but don't think of it as a single sound. Think of it as a story. The story has 3 parts: the impact, the silence, and the renewal." His words were like a map. He wasn't just giving her data, he was giving her a narrative. He spent the next hour explaining it to her. The impact wasn't just a bang, he said. It was a transfer of impossible energy, a shockwave that traveled through the entire planet, possibly even shaking the core. The silence that followed was the moment of calm after the unimaginable violence, as billions of tons of rock fell back to the surface. And then, the renewal. The slow, inexorable welling up of molten lava from deep within the planet, seeping into the wound and creating a new, smooth surface. It was a story of trauma and healing written on a planetary scale, and for reasons she didn't fully understand, it resonated deeply with Ilara. It felt familiar. She started with the impact. She didn't want a Hollywood explosion sound. That would be cheap and loud. She wanted to convey scale. She took the data Cale sent about the energy release and used it to create a sound that was less of a bang and more of a deep, world-shattering thud. It was a sound you felt in your bones. A single, catastrophic event that lasted for only a second in her composition, but whose echo would linger for billions of years. She made it so low and powerful that she had to turn her subwoofer down. Then came the silence. This was the hardest part. How do you compose silence? Cale had told her that after the initial impact, the basin would have been a chaotic, hellish landscape. But on a planetary timescale, that chaos settled quickly into a profound stillness. Ilara created this section by stripping away almost everything. She left only the faintest, most distant echo of the impact, like a memory of a nightmare and the ever-present, but now disturbed core pulse which beat with a slightly wounded, irregular rhythm. For days she worked on the renewal. This was the heart of the story. This was the healing. Kyle described the lava not as a violent eruption, but as a slow, inevitable seep, like syrup spreading across a giant plate. She tried using deep, bubbling sounds, but it felt wrong. It sounded like a cauldron, angry and hot. Frustrated, she took a break and made herself a cup of tea. As she stood in her kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, she absent-mindedly tapped her finger on the counter. She listened to the sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, patient. It wasn't about the sound of the lava itself, she realized. It was about its movement, its patience. She went back to her desk, a new idea forming. She created a new sound, a very slow, warm, pulsating tone. It started almost imperceptibly softly, underneath the wounded silence. Then with glacial slowness, it began to grow. It wasn't a melody. It was a presence. It was the sound of warmth returning, of a planet actively fixing its own wound. She layered it with a subtle crystalline shimmer, imagining the lava cooling and solidifying into new rock. She worked for 3 days almost without stopping, weaving the 3 parts together: the impact, the silence, the renewal. She balanced the volumes, the transitions, until the story flowed seamlessly. It was a 7-minute piece, but it felt like an epic journey. She was nervous as she exported the file. This felt more personal than anything she had ever created. She sent it to Cale with a message that just said, "Here is the heart of Caloris." Then she waited. She was too anxious to sit still. She cleaned her entire apartment. She did her laundry. She even went for a walk, something she rarely did. When she returned, her laptop showed a new message notification. Her hand trembled as she clicked it. There was no text, not a single word. Cale had simply sent a link to a video. Puzzled, she clicked it. It opened a video player. The screen was black for a moment, and then a simple line of text appeared on the screen. The Caloris Basin. Mercury. And then her music began to play. As her soundscape filled the silence, the black screen was replaced with a breathtaking, high-resolution, color-enhanced image of the Caloris Basin, sent from the messenger probe. It was a vast golden-orange plain, circled by rugged blue-gray mountains. The image was stunning on its own, but paired with her music, it became something else entirely. As the deep thud of the impact sounded, the video zoomed in on the basin's center. As the wounded silence played, the image panned across the lonely, empty plain. And as the warm, pulsating tones of the renewal began to swell, the video slowly faded into a different, more recent geological map, showing the smooth, solidified lava flows. The video ended. The screen went black again. Ilara sat in her chair, tears silently streaming down her face. She wasn't sad. She was overwhelmed. He had taken her sound, her emotional interpretation, and he had married it to the science, to the visual reality. He had shown her that she hadn't just made up a story. She had told the true story of Caloris. She had found its heart. A new message popped up from Cale. It was only 3 words. You gave it voice. The success of the Caloris piece changed something between them. It was no longer just a scientist and an artist collaborating. They were partners in discovery. They started a new, even more ambitious project, mapping the entire sound of Mercury's northern hemisphere. Their messages were now a constant stream of ideas, audio snippets, and data files. Ilara's hard drive was filled with folders with names like magnetic storms and polar ice shimmer. One evening, as they were discussing the best way to sonify the weak tail of Mercury's magnetic field, Cale's messages became slower, more hesitant. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he typed. The words appeared on her screen one by one, as if he was thinking carefully about each one. Ilara's heart did a little flip. A part of her had always been waiting for this moment, the moment where this digital friendship would hit a wall. Maybe he was married. Maybe he was going to say this was getting too time-consuming. "Okay," she typed back, her own fingers feeling clumsy. It's about my work, he continued. I have to travel for a conference. The Planetary Science Conference. It's a big one, all the top researchers in my field will be there. Ilara felt a wave of relief, followed by a strange pang of, what was it, envy? She pictured him in a fancy hotel ballroom, surrounded by brilliant minds talking about things she could only begin to understand. That sounds amazing, Kale. You should be proud. You'll do great. Thank you, he replied. There was another long pause. The little icon showing he was typing appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. The conference. It's in your city. It's at the convention center downtown next month. Ilara froze. She stared at the words. In your city. The digital world, the safe, comfortable space of text and sound files, had just collided with her real, physical world. He wasn't just a name on a screen anymore. He was a person who would be breathing the same air in the same city in just a few weeks. Before she could even process this, a second message arrived. And I'm presenting a paper. It's about new geological models for the Rachmaninoff Basin, the one where you found the thermal cracking sounds. A smile spread across Ilara's face. Kyle, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. His response was immediate. I want to show your work. The smile vanished from Ilara's face. She read the sentence 3 times. It didn't make sense. My work? What do you mean? I want to play a segment of The Heart of Caloris during my presentation, he typed. I want to show them how sonification can provide an intuitive, emotional understanding of planetary geology that graphs cannot. I want them to hear what you've done. Ilara's whole body went cold, then hot. She felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of panic. No. This was her private world. Their private project. The thought of it being played in a room full of serious, critical scientists made her feel physically sick. Kale, I don't think that's a good idea, she typed, her fingers trembling. They're scientists. They'll think it's silly. They'll tear it apart. It's not proper science. That's exactly the point, Kale replied, his messages coming faster now, filled with a passion she could feel through the screen. Science isn't just about numbers, Ilara. It's about wonder. It's about connection. You've created that. You've connected to Mercury in a way none of us have. You've made it a place, not just a dataset. They need to see that. I need to show them that. Ilara stood up from her desk, her heart pounding. She paced around her small, soundproofed room. The walls that usually felt like a protective cocoon now felt like they were closing in. He was asking her to step out of the shadows, to put her name, her creation, out in front of everyone. She sat back down. I can't. I'm not a public person. I work alone. In here. She gestured to the empty room, a useless gesture he couldn't see. There was a long silence from Kyle's side. Finally, a new message arrived. It was softer. I understand being scared. I get nervous before every talk. But please, just think about it. There's one more thing. He took a deep breath, digitally speaking. I would really like to meet you properly in person. Maybe we could have coffee after the talk or before, if you're comfortable. The panic mixed with a flutter of a completely different feeling. He wanted to meet her, not just her work. Her mind became a battlefield. One side screamed in terror, they will laugh at you. You will embarrass him. You'll have to make eye contact and make small talk and it will be awful. The other side, a much quieter but persistent voice, whispered, what if it's okay? What if he's as kind in person as he is online? What if you're not as alone as you think you are? She thought about the lonely nights before Mercury. She thought about the profound peace his friendship and their project had brought her. She owed him so much, and he was asking for this one terrifying thing she didn't know what to do. She felt trapped between her fear and her gratitude, between her desire to stay safe and a tiny, flickering curiosity to see who this person really was. I need to think. Kyle, she typed, the words feeling heavy and final. I'm sorry. I just need some time. Of course, he replied instantly. Take all the time you need. No pressure. The offer is there and it will stay there. She closed her laptop. The room was silent. For the first time in weeks, the silence felt loud again. The sounds of Mercury were gone, replaced by the deafening noise of her own fear and the thrilling, terrifying possibility of a hand reaching out from the digital world, waiting for her to take it. The week after Kale's invitation was the worst Ilara had experienced in months. The peaceful rhythm of her life was shattered. Sleep, her hard-won treasure, abandoned her again. She would lie in the dark, and instead of being carried away by the sounds of Mercury, her mind would conjure a nightmare. She was in a vast, dark auditorium. A single spotlight was on her. Rows and rows of faces, blurry and severe, stared back. She was at a podium, but no sound would come out of her mouth. She would look down and see her Mercury soundscape, represented as a delicate glass sculpture in her hands. Then it would slip from her fingers and shatter on the floor into a million pieces. The silent crowd would then begin to laugh, a low, mocking sound that filled the entire room. She would wake up with a gasp, her heart hammering against her ribs, the sheets tangled around her. The hiss in her ears was back, louder than ever. She stopped working on the Mercury project. The sight of her audio software filled her with a sour anxiety. She tried to go back to her commercial work, but even editing the sound for a car commercial felt overwhelming. Her confidence was gone. She drafted a dozen messages to Cale. One was a firm, simple, "I'm sorry, I can't do it, but good luck with your talk." Another was a long, rambling explanation of her anxiety, which she deleted, feeling it was too much to share. Another was a lie. "I'm sick with the flu, so I won't be able to meet." She never sent any of them. A part of her, the part that remembered the feeling of being understood, couldn't bring itself to shut the door completely. The conference was now only 3 days away. The pressure felt like a physical weight on her shoulders. She spent one whole afternoon just staring out her window, watching people walk their dogs and live their normal, uncomplicated lives. She felt a deep envy for their simple anonymity. On the second to last day, something in her broke. The fear was too heavy to carry. She knew she had to say no. It was the only way to make the panic stop. She opened her laptop, her fingers poised to type the final polite refusal. But instead of going to her messages, her hand, almost of its own will, moved the mouse and clicked on a file. It was the very first version of Mercury's Quiet Canyons, the one she had created before she ever spoke to Cale. She pressed play. The familiar sounds filled the room. The deep core pulse, the shimmering sun-touched ridges. It was rougher than her later work, less refined, but it held the seed of everything. She listened and she remembered. She remembered the sheer wonder of that first night, the shock of discovering that this strange alien sound could bring her peace. She remembered the feeling of not being alone in the universe because she was listening to the voice of a planet. She didn't stop there. She played the piece with the thermal cracking sounds that Cale had explained. She played the early version of the Iron Tide. Finally, she played the Heart of Caloris. As the story of the giant basin unfolded, the impact, the silence, the renewal, the tight knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. She listened to the section on renewal, the slow, warm, pulsating tone that represented the planet healing its own catastrophic wound. And a new thought, clear and calm, rose above the noise of her fear. This project was her renewal. Before this, she had been a scarred landscape, silent and unable to rest. The sounds of Mercury and her friendship with Cale had been the slow, patient lava that had filled her cracks and given her a new, smooth surface. It had given her back her sleep. It had given her back a sense of purpose. It had given her a friend. Cale wasn't asking her to stand in front of a crowd and be a public speaker. He was asking to show their work. He was proud of what they had built together. He believed in it. And he believed in her. Could she really say no out of fear? Could she really hide this thing that had saved her? She thought about Mercury itself. A small planet orbiting terrifyingly close to a giant, powerful sun. It was battered, scarred, and extreme. Yet it endured. It had its own quiet beauty, its own profound story. It didn't need to be loud to be important. She didn't need to be a brilliant speaker. She just had to be Alara, the person who listened to planets. She opened a new message to Cale. Her hands were still slightly unsteady, but her mind was clear. "Cale," she typed, "if the offer is still open, I would like to meet you for coffee, and you have my permission to play the Caloris piece. Just please don't ask me to speak. I'll be the one hiding in the back row." She took a deep breath, and before she could change her mind, she clicked send. The panic didn't magically disappear, but it was now joined by something else, a fragile but determined thread of courage. She had faced the terrifying canyon of her fear, and she had decided to take the first step across. She didn't know if she would make it to the other side, but she was going to try. The day of the conference arrived, a day that felt both terrifyingly fast and like it had taken a lifetime to come. Alara put on her best version of normal person clothes, dark trousers and a simple, comfortable sweater. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, someone trying to look brave. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs the entire bus ride downtown. The city outside the window seemed too bright, too loud. Every person on the bus felt like a potential critic. She clutched her phone, the text from Cale with the meeting spot burning in her mind. "I'll be at a small coffee cart in the main lobby. I'll be the nervous one holding a data tablet." When she walked into the convention center, the scale of it almost made her turn around. The ceiling was impossibly high. Thousands of people in professional attire moved through the vast space, their voices creating a roaring ocean of sound. Name tags swung from lanyards around their necks. She felt like an imposter, a ghost who had wandered into the wrong reality. And then she saw him. He was standing by a small coffee cart, just as he said he would be. He was taller than she had imagined, with kind eyes that were scanning the crowd, looking for her. He held a data tablet in one hand, and he did, in fact, look nervous. He kept shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Their eyes met. For a second, they just looked at each other. Two digital ghosts suddenly made flesh and blood. Then a slow, hesitant smile spread across his face. It was a warm smile, and it reached his eyes. Alara felt some of the tightness in her chest loosen. She managed a small, shaky smile back. She walked over, her legs feeling like wood. "Alara," he said. His voice was exactly how it sounded in her head, only richer, more real. "Cale," she said, and her own voice came out as a whisper. There was an awkward moment where they didn't know whether to shake hands or hug. They ended up doing a little bit of both, a clumsy, gentle pat on the shoulder that made them both laugh, breaking the tension. "They have good coffee here," he said, gesturing to the cart. "My treat. How do you take it?" "Black is fine," she said. "Thank you." As he bought the coffees, they fell into an easy, familiar rhythm of talking. It was just like their messages. He told her about a boring talk he'd been to earlier that morning. She told him how overwhelming the crowd was. The digital connection they had built was strong enough to survive the transition to the real world. But as they finished their coffee, Cale's nervousness returned. "My talk is in 20 minutes, he said. You'll be there?" "I'll be in the back," Alara promised. "I'll be the one trying to become one with the wall." He smiled, but she could see the pressure he was under. "Wish me luck. Just play the piece," she said. "They'll love it." She found a seat in the very last row of the large, dimly lit auditorium. It was filling up quickly with hundreds of scientists. The air hummed with intellectual energy. She felt tiny and insignificant. When Cale walked onto the stage, he looked small under the bright lights. He adjusted the microphone, his voice slightly amplified. He began his talk using complex graphs and high-resolution images of the Rachmaninoff Basin. Alara understood maybe one word in 5. It was full of terms like ejecta blankets and subsidence patterns. She started to feel her anxiety returning. This was his world, not hers. She didn't belong here. Then about halfway through his presentation, he paused. He took a sip of water. "We often look at these geological features as static images, as lines on a graph," he said, his voice growing more confident. "But a planet is a dynamic system. It has a history, a rhythm. I've been fortunate to collaborate with someone who has helped me, and I hope can help you. Feel that rhythm in a new way." He clicked a button on his remote. The screen behind him went black, and then the first deep, resonant notes of the heart of Caloris began to flow from the high-quality conference hall speakers. Alara held her breath. The sound was immense in the large room. The deep thud of the impact was not just heard. It was felt in the floor. The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop. No one coughed. No one rustled paper. Hundreds of brilliant minds were simply listening. Alara watched the faces in the rows in front of her. She saw frowns of concentration soften. She saw one woman close her eyes, letting the sound wash over her. She saw a man lean forward, his chin in his hand, completely absorbed as the warm, healing tones of the renewal section began to swell. Cale didn't speak over the music. He let it tell its story. He stood to the side of the stage, watching the audience, a quiet smile on his face. As the final soft echo of the piece faded into silence, the auditorium remained quiet for a long, breathtaking moment. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a silence of respect, of absorption. Then the applause started. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause from before. It was warm, genuine, and sustained. A few people even whistled. Cale stepped back to the podium. "That," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was a sonification by Alara Vance, a brilliant sonic artist who goes by Quiet Canyons. She isn't just translating data. She's giving a voice to the worlds we study." "Thank you." He didn't point her out. He didn't ask her to stand. He simply gave her the credit and let the moment be about the work. As the crowd continued to clap, Alara sat in the dark of the back row, tears welling in her eyes once more. But this time they were not tears of being overwhelmed. They were tears of a quiet, powerful joy. They hadn't laughed. They had listened. They had understood. Her secret world, shared with one person, had just been shared with hundreds, and they had respected it. In that shared silence, she hadn't felt like an imposter. She had felt for the first time like she truly belonged. The applause was still ringing in Alara's ears as she slipped out of the auditorium. She needed a moment alone to breathe, to let the storm of emotions settle. She found a quiet corner by a large window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It reminded her of the colors she had seen in the enhanced images of Mercury. A few minutes later, she felt a presence beside her. It was Cale. He had a huge, relieved grin on his face, and his presentation folder was clutched tightly in his hand. "They loved it," he said, his voice full of wonder. "People stopped me in the hallway. They didn't just want to talk about the data. They wanted to talk about the feeling of the planet." "You did that, Alara." She smiled, a real easy smile that reached her eyes. "We did that," she corrected him gently. "I just made the sounds. You gave them the story." They stood there for a moment, watching the city lights begin to twinkle on below. The formal barrier between them was gone. The silence was comfortable, like the one they had shared in the auditorium. "Are you hungry?" Cale asked. "I know a place nearby that doesn't mind if you look a little tired after a long day." The restaurant was a small, quiet Italian place, nothing fancy. Over plates of pasta, they talked for real. Not about Mercury or data or sound waves. They talked about their lives. Cale told her about growing up in a small town, building his first telescope from a kit, and his dream of one day working on a mission to the outer planets. Alara found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone in years. About her mother's worry over her isolation. About her own dreams of scoring a film one day. And about the long, lonely struggle with insomnia that had started it all. It wasn't a date. It was something better. It was the continuation of a friendship that had already been built on a solid foundation. They were just finally meeting in person. Life did not become a fairy tale for Alara. She did not become a famous artist or a celebrated scientist. But it became better. It became richer. She and Cale continued their collaboration. With his encouragement, she gathered all the pieces of Mercury's Quiet Canyons, polished them, and released them as a full album online. She didn't expect much, but slowly, reviews and messages started to trickle in. A university professor in Canada wrote to say he played it for his astronomy students to help them visualize planetary geology. A new mother in Scotland sent a message saying it was the only thing that helped her colicky baby fall asleep. A man in Japan, who worked long, stressful hours in a Tokyo office, said he listened to it on his commute to find a moment of peace. Her creation, born from her own desperate need for quiet, was now helping others find their own. It wasn't a massive commercial success, but it was a human one. Every message felt like a small, bright star in her universe. Her work life changed too. The confidence she gained from the project and from facing her fear at the conference spilled over into her commercial work. She started to say no to projects that didn't interest her, and began seeking out more creative sound design work for independent documentaries. She even reached out to a few local filmmakers. One evening, a few months later, she was working on a new idea. Cale had sent her data from the ice giants Uranus and Neptune. It was a new challenge, a new world of sounds to explore. She was sketching out some initial tones, colder, more mysterious than the sounds of Mercury. She took a break and walked to her window. The city was quiet. The hiss in her ears was still there, a constant companion she had learned to live with. But it no longer controlled her. She thought about the journey she had been on, from a woman trapped in silence, to discovering the voice of a planet, to sharing that voice with the world. She had found a friend, and in doing so, had found a stronger version of herself. She wasn't cured. Life still had its stressful days and its sleepless nights. But now she had tools. She had her sounds. She had a purpose. She had a friend to message with a crazy idea at 3 a.m. She looked up at the night sky. She couldn't see Mercury from her window. It was too close to the sun, but she knew it was there, spinning quietly in its vast, silent journey. She was no longer the woman trying to escape the silence. She was the woman who listened to it, who learned from it, and who sometimes, when the world got too loud, would put on her headphones and take a quiet journey through the canyons of space. A reminder that even in the deepest silence there is music, and you are never truly alone. She had found her new orbit, and it was a good one.